All right, I'm getting the thumbs up to start. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to almost the end of the second day. I hope everybody's having a good time. My name is Norm Walsh. I'm a principal engineer at MarkLogic. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary, in fact. And I'm the lead engineer for Ops Director, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So Ops Director is a MarkLogic application designed to help you manage the MarkLogic enterprises in your MarkLogic clusters in your enterprise. If you're familiar with, if you've got several clusters already and you've hired DBAs and folks to manage them, you know that it can be challenging to find what the current state of things is, what maybe needs to be looked at, what situation is hot at the moment, is everything running perfectly fine? You might want to know all of those things, and you can use existing logging tools and such to find some of those answers. But Ops Director is built on MarkLogic, and MarkLogic has a really good handle for how well it's running. We have all sorts of ways of determining that. And so Ops Director is an application designed to help you monitor and analyze and respond to events that occur on all of the clusters in your enterprise in an easy-to-use way and in a proactive way, and it's a platform that we're building out to do more and more. Sorry, I skipped a slide. So just a very brief note about how it works. What we do is we set up secure communications between the Ops Director application, which is running on a MarkLogic cluster, and the other MarkLogic clusters in your enterprise. So this is done with certificate-based authentication. It's done with SSL. It's completely secure. No user IDs and passwords are exchanged. It's all done with certificates. So that's secure. And then you connect to the Ops Director application with a web browser, and you get a unified view over all those managed clusters exactly in one place. What is exactly being exchanged? MarkLogic clusters send configuration changes proactively to Ops Director. So if somebody adds a database or reindexes a forest or changes something, that will get pushed to Ops Director. Ops Director will incorporate that, and your view of your enterprise will be updated in the Ops Director application. It also pushes system error logs to Ops Director, and it pushes metering information. So if you're familiar with monitoring history on any given cluster, on any given host, the analyze functionality that we'll look at in a few minutes in Ops Director gives you that view, but across all of your clusters, all in one place. Ops Director also turns around and uses that secure communications channel to ask clusters for information. So it retrieves the properties for all of the resources, all of the forests, the databases, the hosts, et cetera. It receives status information about those things on a periodic basis. And it retrieves system alerts. There's a endpoint on the management API that reports the health status of a cluster. And we poll those and we integrate those into Ops Director. So this is sort of a typical Ops Director configuration that you might have in your enterprise. You've got a small Ops Director cluster. You've got a trade and asset cluster, a customer information cluster, maybe a few dev clusters, a QA cluster, maybe a bunch of other clusters. And all of them are feeding information into Ops Director. And if I was the sort of person who trusted networks in conferences in hotels, I could spin that all up on AWS and show you that. But I've done this before. And I'm going to show you something much smaller for the purposes of this demo. So I have a couple of nodes, a pseudo trade store cluster running in Docker containers on my laptop, and I have Ops Director running here on a different cluster, and it's managing itself. So what you're going to see in my demo is two clusters. One of them is the Ops Director cluster managing itself, and one of them is this other little two-node cluster over there. But everything else is the same. Let's switch over to the demo. Actually, pretend that I haven't started yet. And I meant to run that before I started. OK, so I have made the font size as big as I can for the benefit of people in the back. I'm going to scale it back just for a moment so you can see that it's not quite so cramped an application in the real world. But I sat in the back for a talk yesterday, and I'd like you to be able to see my demo. So I'm making it a little bit bigger. And here we have a problem. Here we have ops director in a state that makes me unhappy. We can see that, that there is a problem. This red bar over here says there's some sort of a critical issue somewhere. Over here we can see some health alerts. This gives us some idea of what's going wrong. And this dashboard down here shows us when other problems have occurred recently. And so I know something is wrong. Now, if I want to dig in a little deeper, I see that there's a host maybe that's at fault. So I can click on this table, on this tab, and I'll get a view, a heat map view of all of the hosts in my enterprise. I can group that by clusters if I want to. And in fact, now I can see that what we have here is something is wrong on that trade cluster. And if I click on what's wrong on the trade cluster, I can bring up more information. And that, I mean, that works for the ones that are functioning perfectly well also. And I can see statistics about what's going on that host. And then I can see the host alerts that are specifically related to that. And in this case, the host is offline or not responding. That's because I shut the Docker container down. I've sent a minion off to fix that while I continue talking. That's going to come back and be nice again in a little bit. So we're going to come back to this screen later when it's all green and we're going to be happy. But for the moment, I'm going to press on and walk you through the rest of the application. And as I go, I'll point out some of the things that are new in 1.1. And as I should have said when I started, I will certainly have plenty of time at the end for questions. So if we just walk our way across the tabs here at the top, the second tab over is Manage. And this is the view of all of the resources in your enterprise in one place. Over here on the left, we have this tree control, which we can use to expand and contract the way you'd expect. We can also click on these to change the view. I'm not going to do that right this moment. And then here we can see that we have clusters, we have hosts, we have databases, we have app servers. I can search, so I'm in app servers, I can search for Manage, and it will show me the ones that have Manage the way you'd expect. I can move the tabs around, move the columns around if I want. I can make some of the columns go away if I want. I can change the sizes of the columns, just what you'd expect from a sort of modern application. One of the things on this screen that's new in 1.1 is you can click this button here and you can download all of the data in this table in CSV. So if you have a system in-house for analyzing information about the health of your clusters, the health of your enterprise, you can get this data out, run R tools over it, run any sort of network analytics tools you want over it. It just comes out as a straight CSV file. Do I dare click on that? I didn't click on this one. I did the demo in the dry run. But I did dare. So there we go. So you can just see that's the CSV file that contains all of that data. So you can incorporate that into other applications. You can integrate Ops Director into other parts of your analytics. On the next page over is the Analyze page. This is where I told you you could get basically monitoring history for your whole enterprise in one place. And you can decide what frequency of data that you would send to your Ops Director cluster, depending on how many nodes you have, how many clusters you have. For this demo, I'm using raw because that gives me more data. And I only started running the demo box this morning, so I'm going to pick 3 hours. And now we can see all the disk I/O statistics for all the databases, all the forests on my cluster. If I don't particularly care about disks, I can minimize some of those. If I'm interested in what that spike is, I can zoom in and take a closer look. I'm guessing that's when I turned off one of those clusters and it didn't work. But if I want more information, I can drill down and I can get more and more statistics. I can also, if I don't care about the Ops Director cluster because that one's been running fine, I can use that, I can click that, I can apply those changes. And now I'm only looking at the trade store cluster. So a really easy way for you to explore all of the data that's stored. The meters data collects in the Ops Director database, so you have a historical record going back as long as you're keeping that data. And again, you can also download all of that meters data in CSV and incorporate that into other tools you might use along the way. The next tab over is the Support tab. And here we see all of the system alerts that have occurred, and you can filter through those and say, I only care about the critical ones. You can see what their status is. You can search them. You can acknowledge them. This one is closed. Maybe I don't care about this one anymore. I can say, OK, let's just close that one. And I apologize for the strange display because I've made the font so big on my relatively small projected screen. But I can say acknowledge that one, and it will go away. And if I come back up here, I mean, we're not deleting any data. There's nothing lost. If you come back and say, you know what, I actually care about the acknowledged ones, you can see the acknowledged ones. They come back. These are the health status alerts. And if I sort by status, they're all closed, which means that if I go back to the other screen, it'll all be green. But I'm going to save that for later. If I'd gotten here quicker, some of these would still be open because Ops Director hadn't figured out that that host had come back up and rejoined its cluster and been happy.
Yeah, what does closed mean?
Closed means that the event has stopped happening. So the way it works is we ask the managed cluster, how are you? And the managed cluster says, I'm terrible. It's a forest that's not working. I'm in a really bad state. And so we open an alert for that. We say, OK, there's something wrong with the forest, and we store that information, and you can get to it quickly. Later on, we ask that same cluster, how are you? And if it stops telling us that forest is in a bad state, we say, OK, that issue has been fixed. We mark that status as closed. We leave it in here so you can see it. You can tell that something happened, but it's no longer believed to be a crisis just at the moment. Also on the support tab, you can see the event logs. These are all of the system error logs from all of the managed clusters. If you aren't familiar with MarkLogic 9 yet, one of the things that we did in 9 was we broke the error logs out, so there are now separate application error logs and a separate system error log. This is partly because we don't want PII to be in the system error log, which might get shared around. It's also partly because application error logs can be quite large. It can clutter up the error log. We're only sending system error logs to Ops Director at the moment. It's a common question whether we could also send application logs. There's various reasons why we haven't done that yet. It's not impossible. It just isn't in scope at the moment. One of the things that's related to that is you maybe don't want to send debug level log messages to Ops Director. If you've got hundreds and hundreds of nodes, dozens of clusters, build yourself a great big Ops Director cluster and go for it if you want. I just don't think that that's a very practical approach. You don't need to do that. You can send, I think the default is notice, but you could also say warning if you wanted to. That raises the question, what happens if I see this warning here? I want some more context. I want to understand what was going on when that happened. You can do that. You can just click on this link over here, and it will go back to the original host that generated that log message and ask for the file error log for a period of time around that message. So now we can see it in context. Even though I'm not sending info level or debug level log messages to Ops Director, when I follow that link, I see info ones. And if I had turned finer levels of logging on the file log on that host, I would see those as well. I don't think I said it, but it goes without saying that you can search. You can also change the time period. You can see only, well, you're not going to see any finest ones because I'm not sending finest ones. It occurs to me in this presentation that this list would make a lot more sense if it was the other way around. But I can say I only want to see the critical ones, and it will show me only the critical ones. I guess there weren't any critical ones. Or the demo gods are choosing, no, I guess there weren't any critical ones. So there are some errors, et cetera. You can do the usual things that you would expect. Next on this page is the task console. The task console shows you all of the scheduled tasks operating across all of the nodes on your enterprise. So if you're seeing periodic issues with CPU usage or something, you can take a quick peek here and see, is there some scheduled task that runs at the same time as all of these problems. And in the future, when Ops Director has the ability to establish new scheduled tasks and do things, there'll be more functionality on this page. In 1.1, which is shipping now, Ops Director is still mostly a viewing tool and not a tool that you can use to make changes. But that will change in the future as we continue the development. I think I forgot to say something, so I'm going to go back. Yes, I forgot to say something. So one of the things that you might want to be able to do if you are trying to debug a recurring problem or something, you might say, if a particular log message comes in, I want to generate an alert for that. I want to know that right away. I don't want to wait until I go search through the logs for that. I want that alert to pop up right on that main screen. And so that functionality is actually built into Ops Director 1.1. We didn't get any UI for it in place, so you can't actually use it today. But that's an example of the sort of thing that we'll be doing in the future, making it more interactive, making it provide information to you more quickly and more directly. If you actually had that use case today, I'm sure that we could get that could be arranged with some consulting. There's some files you'd have to change directly because there's no UX for them. But it's an example of a feature we've been working on for a little while. I talked about the task console. That takes me to console settings, which is kind of a grab bag of configuration and data about the Ops Director application itself. And one of the pieces that I want to highlight is this notion of resource groups. If you have a large number of clusters, if you have a large number of applications running, you might not want it to be the case that everybody can administer everything. You might want to say, look, there's a group of people called trade store administrators. They can do anything on the trade store cluster, but they shouldn't be monkeying around with the Ops Director cluster. Or you might say, we've got some DBAs who can do things like run backup jobs. They should be able to see the databases. That doesn't mean they should be able to see the cluster. That doesn't mean they should be able to see or change the hosts. And so resource groups provide a way for you to get that ability. So I've created a resource group here. Resource groups have a type, so you can say clusters or databases or hosts, and then you can put an ad hoc collection of hosts or clusters or databases, things of that type, in that resource group. And this is all built on top of MarkLogic standard security. You give the resource group a role, you give a user that role, that user can see that resource group. Now they can see the resources that are in that resource group. And as you add or remove resources from that group, they'll be able to see or not see those resources in the way you'd expect. So if I go up here to roles, for example, we'll see that the trade admin role provides, in retrospect, naming all these things exactly the same was perhaps an error. Maybe the roles should have had different names. But these are roles, and these roles can see these resource scopes, these resource groups, and that gives users with those roles the ability to see them. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. One of the nice things in 1.1, one of the changes we made is that the resources in the resource groups inherit in a natural way. In 1.0, there was this very rigid view that if you could see a forest, you could see forest, but you couldn't see the database. If you could see the database, you couldn't see the forest. If you wanted to have somebody have the ability to see both the databases and the forest, you had to make two resource groups. You had to make them have a role that they both had. It was tedious to set up, but it was a way of verifying that we had everything cordoned off the way we wanted to. In Ops Director 1.1, we now have a rational set of inheritance rules. So if you give somebody access to the cluster, yes, they can see everything on the cluster. That's the purpose of giving them access to the cluster. If you give them access to the database, they can see the forests in that database, because there's relatively little value in being able to see the database and not also being able to see the forest. So we've tried to make that more straightforward. I should also say that, as I said, Ops Director today is mostly a single pane of glass for you to see things. In the future, we're going to leverage these resource groups to provide fine-grained access control too. We have fine-grained permissions for access to resources in the server. You'll be able to say, here's a resource group for the DBAs. Maybe the DBAs can run backups, but they can't clear the database. Maybe on a dev box, the devs can do anything they want to the databases. On the production box, they can't do anything. They can see it, that sort of a thing. So you'll be able to establish not only rules about what's visible to a particular user with a role, but also what kinds of changes they can make to that resource or that group of resources. So that's also coming. Going to take a brief detour away from resource groups. I'm going to come back and show you those in action in just a moment. I want to show you one other new thing, and that's this list of managed clusters. This is new in 1.1. It solves a problem that you may in fact have had if you've been using Ops Director. Previously, there were instructions for how to fix this in QConsole, but now it's part of the UI. When you establish a managed relationship between Ops Director and a cluster, they get a set of certificates, they begin to do this handshake, they talk to each other. You can imagine what happens. You spin up a cluster for a project, you manage it with Ops Director because that gives you a view into what's going on in that project. Time passes, the project is a success, it comes to an end, IT reclaims their hardware, whether it's real hardware or cloud or whatever. Nobody thought to unmanage the cluster, the MarkLogic cluster, before this happened. And now Ops Director says, you know, I can't talk to that cluster. I can't talk to any of the hosts in that cluster. And it will generate an alert for you. It will tell you that cluster is in an unknown state. Ops Director isn't yet sentient. It doesn't know if it can't reach that cluster because there's a network outage and that you need to fix. It can't tell the difference between that and you turned them all off without telling me. So that cluster will remain in an unknown state, well, if you've turned the hardware off, indefinitely. So on this screen, if you came here and there was an unknown cluster, again, I apologize for the slightly wonky UI given the high resolution, but if I scroll over here, this remove button on a cluster that's in an unknown state, that remove button will be selectable. And if you click on that remove button, it will confirm that you really want to do that, and then it will effectively unmanage the cluster for you. It won't delete any of the data. It will remain in Ops Director. One of the other things that's not in the UX today, but will be eventually, is the ability to do historical retrospective views, to compare states of things. So when I say that unmanaged cluster will disappear from Ops Director, what I mean is it won't be visible as a currently running thing. If you looked back in Ops Director at what was there yesterday, it would reappear. If you said, you know, what's different between today and last week, amongst the differences would be the fact that that cluster no longer existed. So we have the ability to store that. That's one of the reasons why we have managed clusters send things like database configuration information to Ops Director, so that one of the things you'll be able to do when you have a problem is say, did anything change? It worked yesterday, and the developer will swear on a pot of hot coffee that they did not change anything. Not a chance. And you'll go over to Ops Director and you'll do the diff view and say, yeah, what about? And the developer will go, oh, well, I might have changed one thing. I can make that joke because I'm a developer. So anyway, let's go back. One last few things to look at in terms of how these resource groups operate, and then I've let my cheat sheet expire, so pardon me. And then I think I'm actually going to wrap up early, and we will have lots of time for questions. What can't you possibly do while somebody is watching you and you are under pressure? That is, type your password. All right, there we go. So did I say everything I wanted to say there? Yes, I think I probably did, and if I didn't, somebody will ask me a question. Okay, let's go back to the main page. There we go. My minion has gone off and fixed the host that was down, and now we've got a completely green view again. There's still historical information. We can still see that there was a problem on this cluster earlier today, but everything is back to normal. There are no resources in a green state. If we go look, we can look to see what the problems were. If we are confident that we don't care anymore, we can acknowledge them and make them go away so that we don't have to look at them. In fact, I could go here and say, oh, it's all green. Just acknowledge it all, make them all go away. And there we go. There's a completely happy view. And if I went and broke something else, it would come back up here. What I wanted to show you was the actual impact of resource groups. So I have logged in as ops admin, which is not the same as admin. if you logged in as admin, you would get the same view as ops admin, but you don't have to be admin to do this. You just have to have a particular role to run the application. I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log back in again as trade admin. Does anybody remember what I said about the trade? What can't you do when you're being watched? Does anybody remember what I said about the trade admin? No, that's right. That's because I'm getting the password just plain old wrong. What I said about the trade admin was that was a resource group for administrators of the trade cluster. And so you can see now there's only one cluster. Their view of ops director, their view of the data store is that this is just the trade store cluster. And if you gave them access to 3 or 4 other clusters, they would see those, but they don't see any others. So as we walk around and look at the other views, we'll see, when I go back to one of the other admin views, I'll make this point clear. But earlier, there would have been an ops dir cluster in that list because the ops admin can see everything. And if you remember the slide I showed you, there are 2 clusters in this demo. If I log back out for a different view, and I come back in as trade DBA, DBA or DBAs? DBA. What did I say about the trade DBA role? I said that was a role for administrating databases and not anything else. So now this user, when they're logged in, can see that there are 10 databases. And if they go look at the databases, they'll be able to see all the databases, but they can't see anything else. They can't see the app servers. They can't see the hosts, et cetera. So it's a way of constraining the views that you get. And I was lying a little bit before when I said ops admin could see everything. There's one more secret to be revealed before question time. One of the things you might want to have in your enterprise is somebody in charge of administrating licenses, making sure that you're compliant in terms of licenses. So if you log in with a different role, this user is just like the ops admin user in that they can see everything. But if I go over to the console settings, they can also see the license information. So they can review the licenses and such. So you don't have to let your admin see what all those settings are. You can have a special role for that purpose. I hope that I didn't talk too fast. I hope that I didn't forget anything. I'm pretty sure that's the end of my demo. I think I have a couple of more slides to go. And then I will open the floor up for questions. What's new in Ops Director 1.1? We've improved role-based access. We now have inheritance. We've added the ability to export data so that you can integrate it into other analytics tools that you might be using. We've laid the groundwork for some future enhancements, including alerts from logs, which I described earlier. And we've improved some performance issues and made some bug fixes. We've added a UI for removing disconnected clusters. I think those are the highlights for 1.1, which ships with 906. So if you're 905, excuse me. If you're sitting in the back and couldn't see this, you can go download it and install it and kick the tires. What should we do next? This is where what I really want is for you to tell me what we should do next. There's lots of things that we could do. Absolutely on the roadmap is the ability to have Ops Director make changes on the managed clusters. So you can go into the managed cluster, into Ops Director and say, you know what, I want to install a database on that cluster and be able to do it from here, possibly using some new work that we've been doing for extending the REST management API. We could use this to manage cloud services. You can imagine Ops Director as a service or something of that nature where it spins up automatically on your cloud provider with your clusters, that sort of a thing. One of the things that was definitely on the roadmap earlier that no one has talked to me about recently is the ability to do scripted operations. Ops Director has secure credentials for communicating with managed clusters. Suppose that you wanted to allow somebody to write a Python script or a C# program that was supposed to manage a particular cluster, spin a cluster up, couple it with another cluster. You want to give that script the ability to do those operations. You certainly don't want to give that script the admin username and password for the managed clusters. You don't want to give that script the ability to do anything it wants. Ops Director would be able to produce a short-lived certificate that encapsulated the granular permissions that we talked about earlier, give that to that script. That script could then make calls into the managed cluster using that certificate. I think that's something we could do. There's lots of things we could do at a finer level to improve metrics, to improve alerts, et cetera. But as I said when I started, during the Q&A, if there's things that you would like us to do, I'd really like to hear it. If you want to tell one of our PMs, Jim Clark or somebody, about things that you'd like to do, I'm all ears. I'd really like to have a better sense of what you all think is missing. I believe that's me, wrapped up. How early am I? Painfully, embarrassingly early? Yeah, kind of. Sorry. I'll stand here and answer questions. I could tap dance. Thank you very much.
Hi. Do you know what the retention is for the data that's actually stored in Abstractor? Like how far back historically can you look?
You decide. There's a configuration. The documentation describes how to configure that. You can set it for a week, a month, a year, set it for infinity if you'd like, and that's entirely up to you.
And is that set at each individual cluster level, or is that a policy that's set at the abstract level that gets pushed down to each of the clusters that it monitors?
There is no data stored on the clusters. At the moment, it is system-wide. So you can say, I want meters data to be kept for a month. I want log data to be kept for 7 days. Today, there's no way to say, I want log data to be kept for 7 days, except for that cluster. I want 2 years for that cluster. A perfectly reasonable thing to do, but you can't do that today. So, another question? Somebody's going to bring you a microphone because this is being recorded, and although I'll be able to hear your question, the people listening at home, hello, people at home, won't be able to hear you.
Thank you. How do you reconfigure the rules behind the KPIs and alerts?
How do I do what?
Reconfigure the rules behind the KPIs and alerts. So if there's like a certain behavior that's popping up that you'd like to just quiet, or there's a...
So there's no way today to specify rules for making alerts go away. You have to acknowledge them each time. That's certainly another thing that would be straightforward to do. We have, in the course of working on the feature to do alerts from logs, we have some rule-based stuff in there, and that could be extended to say, you know what, I don't care about this alert, or I only care about this alert once a day. But today, the alerts pop up every time they occur.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Is there a way to...
Microphone.
Is there a way for the alerts to send email or page?
No, that's certainly coming. There's no provision today for having the alerts generate that kind of notification. But tying into a notification bus for sending email, it was actually on the roadmap for 1.1 and didn't quite make the cut. So we'll certainly do that. It turns out that sending email in a modern enterprise is more complicated than you'd think because of authenticating to the SMTP server, et cetera. So it looked like an easy do, and then we got a little closer to it and realized that, in fact, there was some infrastructure we needed, and there was like no time left,
Thanks.
as these things go. Anyone else? Somebody in the front?
Oh, thanks.
Can you talk about the other data analytics integration tools you mentioned in the previous slide?
I was intentionally coy about that. We allow you now to download all of the data in CSV, which is an exchange format you can use to pull it into your analytics tools. This was a request that came in from several customers. I didn't ever get a good answer for what tools they actually wanted to pull it into. The business requirement was we need to be able to integrate this data into our existing analytics tools. I said, well, okay, if I give you the data in CSV, can you do that? And they said yes. And I said, okay, we can give you the data in CSV.
Okay. And the second question is this already part of 905?
Yes,
MarkLogic?
this is shipping in 905. You can, in fact, I can show you. I've already got it installed, so it won't be all that interesting. But if you go to the local cluster page and click on the Ops Director tab, The first thing you have to do is install ops director. So on a Virgin install, this would not already be installed. Click the install button, set up the certificates, and then on any cluster that you want to manage, you click manage this cluster, you tell it which cluster you want to do the management, and then it will start talking. And here is where you get to decide. You can decide what level of log messages you want to send and what level of metering data you want to send. And there's actually provision for a more complicated negotiation along those terms. Both the ops director administrator can say, you know what, I don't care what my managed clusters say. I'm not taking anything finer than info level logs, no matter what. But managed clusters can also say, I don't care what my ops director is willing to take, I'm not sending more than notice. So you have control on both ends of that. And the same is true of the metering data.
And this installer is new in 1.1 as well?
No, this installer isn't new in 1.1.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
The question was, this installer is new in 1.1. I don't believe that's the case. I think this was in 1.0. I've been wrong before.
Great talk. So on the monitoring page, you mentioned like you were showing different resource, the usages, right? Like I/O weights, CPU status. Is there any way to tie back? Like for example, if the request is like waiting too much on I/O weight, it may not be the real reason, but it could be because there are like multiple threads which are hitting the database, right? So is there a way to connect the dots?
I think if you come to the performance workshop tomorrow, the performance guys can give you more information on how they do that. And I believe that future work will make that easier. But today, this is the meters data that you get from the monitoring history and from what the meters database, thank you, from the meters database. And so there's no extra functionality beyond showing it to you unified across all of your clusters.
Anyone? Okay.
I confess I haven't downloaded this, so I haven't really seen it in real life except now. Is there a way to see, you know how in the old 8 you can see app server and you see long-running queries and all that, and you can hit cancel? Can you see it here too?
No, you can still go to the individual cluster page and look at those things, but that data isn't yet being sent to ops director.
No, that would be nice.
That would be nice. There's a bunch of interesting and useful performance work that's being investigated. Some changes in various parts of the server to make that easier. So I think we're going to see more of that kind of tool coming in some future release, he says diplomatically. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.